The first episode of this series, considered to be the pilot, covered the original Quake engine, id Tech 1. The 3 games that used this engine were made in an offshoot called Dark Places. Those games were NextWii's Classic, Xonotic, and RexWii's. The series is starting small, sure, but as I research more, and you keep listening, all I care about is that you're enlightened enough to consider the software mentioned in this series. My name is Nintendo Cocules, and this is Computing Comparisons. For this episode, I will be covering the Quake III engine called id Tech 3, as there are 2 fast shooters that I will be comparing made using this engine. OpenArena, an AFPS from 2005 to 2012, and Unvanquished, a real-time strategy FPS hybrid from 2012, a fork of Tremulous. Both games were made using offshoots of id 3, with IO Quake III and Daemon being used for OA and Unvanquished respectively. In this episode, we will be looking into the gunplay, movement, and strategy that comes from playing these 2 games. And yes, this is me playing the games in the background, if you were curious. As always, the references used for the research into these games and the engine are in the description below. Let us start this episode with the engine itself. Before anything else, I want to explain this engine so you can understand what I am getting into. Quake III Arena is an arena first-person shooter from 1999, which is the parent game that shows off what id Tech 3 can do. It is multiplayer focused, wherein the campaign simulates the multiplayer online play through the bots. Though, what I'm playing here is a free software replacement for Q3A, which I will get into in a minute. That said, the game comprises of a minimalistic design, with the boundaries of a goth horror theme associated with Quake. It lacks rarely used items and features, and is highly customizable and extensive, ranging from changing your own field of vision all the way to texture detail, if you have the know-how. Heck, you can even use advanced movement techniques, like strafe jumping and rocket jumping. One quick side note. Challenge Pro Mode Arena, or CPMA, is a Quake III Arena mod that was very popular during the game's lifespan based upon its movement style. It was actually demonstrated in a previous video on this channel. Note that these games are made in C, and possibly Quake C too. You might want to learn C if you want to make a game using this engine's offshoots. Though, if you're familiar with C++, you'll be happy to know that 14% of id Tech 3's rewrite is in C++. I'm getting off topic though. The point is, this is a well-known engine for game developers, especially since the source code was released on August 19th, 2005, under the GNU General Public License version 2. OpenArena would be released the day the source code was unveiled. Speaking of OA, let's get into it. OpenArena aimed to be a free software replacement for those that couldn't afford Quake III Arena, especially for the price it was going for at that time. Though you can still play it to this day, keep in mind that it had discontinued releases after version 0.8.8, which was released in February of 2012. However, I was playing the game using the Omega mod, which aimed to revive this game starting in 2021. The gameplay shown here is standard OA from 2012, the version before the game would be indefinitely suspended. You get the classic modes from Quake III Arena if you've played it in the past, from Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, and the like. It sounds very similar to the other games from the Dark Places episode. While yes, there are similarities between the two engines I won't get into today. The engine this game uses is IO Quake III. It's a false offshoot of id3 that cleans up the source code a little bit, fixes bugs from Quake III Arena, and makes things graphically advanced with simple direct media library or SDL and OpenAL. What makes this game and engine so special, you may be asking? It is considered to be a platform for computer scientists. But again, I'm not going into that. Boy, am I going off kilter here. Let's actually get into the gameplay itself. It's your typical AFPS, much like how Q3A plays. It's nothing special, but to those who have played it years ago, it was one of the games that had stood the test of time, despite its discontinuation. The movement is not too fast, but also a good speed for beginners to get into. Also, the weapons are pretty decent, as they're balanced based upon the roles they play in certain situations. For me personally, I would consider that pretty good, though some of the weapons are not for everyone. The lightning gun is pretty fun to use, not gonna lie. Quake junkies will especially like how the game plays almost exactly like Q3A, since the play for both games is similar. The strategy though is something different. It's mostly based upon aiming and how much damage you do with your weapons. Weapon switching is well known to be a key factor to getting good at these types of games, and OpenArena is no exception. Xonotic is well known for this mechanic, taking from NextWeaves. That doesn't take away, however, that anyone can learn this system and get good on a casual level. There isn't really much to do in OA, since I hadn't played it that much compared to something like Xonotic or Apex Legends. Yes, that Apex that everyone talks about being dog mines since Season 9. Let's move on to the Unvanquished game before my brain explodes. Now this is where the meat and potatoes of strategy games and FPS games meet together. And it was through Tremulous, the game that was eventually forked into this, Unvanquished. The premise is simple. There are two teams, aliens and humans. Their goal is to destroy the other team's base, and telenodes and or eggs used to spawn humans and aliens respectively. This game uses the Daemon engine, another offshoot of id3, a fork of OpenWolf. Real quick, this game is BSD 3 clause licensed alongside GPL and zlib. The assets are CC BY SA 4.0 licensed, so it's also Cultural Works approved, whatever that means. You may see different mechanics than an OA, and that's because it incorporates elements from Wolfenstein enemy territory. Even Xonotic was ported to this engine as an experiment at one point. I would love to play that version of Xonotic. Heck, I can do a computing comparisons episode on that. Let me focus again. We've had a lot of it this episode. Anyway, it's a standard sci-fi horror real-time strategy game where you build up your base to defend from the enemy team. And the first-person shooter part mainly applies to the humans. The aliens are close-range attackers, but are faster than humans who have to carry weapons, like the Pain Saw, the Last Gun, Mass Driver, and even the submachine gun and shotgun. I can't really get into the mechanics too much, as we'd be here all day, so do yourself a favor and research this game some more. My brain hurts after researching this game already. Oh, right, gunplay. It's way different than you're used to, since it requires that you hold one weapon at a time, like your standard games. However, you have a blaster equipped on you at all times at your disposal, and even as far as defense, if you have the construction kit. On the flip side, you have a swipe if you're a Granger alien, and building things. You'll recognize some of the weapon mechanics from Quake III Arena as you play along, like the last gun being used at any distance, and the mass driver being your railgun, as an example. The movement is also something I wasn't used to at first. Though it is Quake 3 based, jumping while running will boost you to where it's almost like strafe jumping. It's more of a slower movement, since this isn't an AFPS. With RTS elements, that wouldn't make it too good, and it would be something not akin to slower games that use RTS elements. Take a look at Zero AD, an open source RTS based upon Age of Empires 2, as an example. Otherwise, there isn't much to say about it otherwise. There is something I would like to apologize for. This was a shorter episode than I had anticipated, but that's kinda on par with what I had done within the last few weeks on this channel, with the exception of the last episode of Computing Comparisons. That said, these two games are a good option if you wanted to play something that's Quake 3 Arena based, but you don't want to play a proprietary game using id Tech 3. I don't blame you. Although, Urban Terror looks good. I hadn't gotten into it yet. That is a separate proprietary game that is made for Windows, Linux, and Mac. Whatever your perspective, there are quite a few of these shooters made in different engines out there. Just take your pick, or watch this series to understand some casual differences I notice as a pro-am Instagib player and an amateur vanilla AFPS player. Like what you've been seeing me with playing OA in the background, and also Unvanquished. Would I encourage you to play both games? I absolutely would, without question, as these are good false interpretations of how this engine is supposed to work, at least on paper. How they applied is what really counts for me. And by the way, by the same token, it can also be found that if you're not into real-time strategy games, then OpenArena, in this case, would be good for you. But if you play real-time strategy games and haven't really played an FPS with RTS elements, Unvanquished would be a pretty good game to check out. But that said, that is it for today's episode. If you like what you see and want to see more episodes of Computing Comparisons in the future, you can do this one of 5 ways. You can hit the like button to show your support to the CoculesNation channel. You can hit the subscribe button to become a member of the CoculesNation community. You can ring the bell icon to be notified when new episodes arrive every Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. Pacific time. You can comment on all of our videos. Hey, all of our videos are open for comment. And last but not least, you can also share this channel with your family and friends so you can get them into using Linux for gaming. We also have a server on Revolt, and I am considering making a server on Matrix as well. I hope there's a Revolt to Matrix bridge, because otherwise I have 2 different servers to manage. And one more thing before we go. I also have musical covers and maybe originals on my personal channel, my second channel, which will be linked in the description below by my editor. That being said, thank you, and good night.